The iron door slammed shut behind me, and the sound of 20,000 alien voices crashed against my ears like a physical blow. My hands were shaking, not from fear, though I had plenty of that, from the cold. They had kept me in a freezing cell for 3 days without food, and now they wanted me to fight. My name is Holly Parker. 2 weeks ago, I was a scientist studying alien plants on a small research ship. Today, I was standing in the dirt of a fighting pit on a planet I could not pronounce, waiting for something large and angry to come through the opposite gate and try to end my life. The creature who had dragged me here was called Veltor. He had 4 arms, yellow skin, and a smile that showed too many teeth. He had looked at me when the slavers first handed me over, and he had laughed. Actually laughed. Like I was a joke he had been waiting his whole life to hear. "Earth creature," he had said in broken common tongue. "Small, soft, no claws, no armor, no poison. You will make the betting very funny tonight." I had not answered him. I had learned in the 3 days since my capture that answering made things worse. The slavers had sold me cheap because my home world, Earth, was not yet a full member of the Galactic Council. That meant no one would come looking for me. No ransom. No rescue. Just a quick sail to the fighting pits on Vorthak Prime, where creatures from 100 worlds tore each other apart for the amusement of gamblers. I could hear the announcer now, his voice booming through speakers I could not see. He was listing the odds. I did not need to understand every word to know what they were saying about me. The number 847 kept repeating. 847 to 1 against the human. That was me. I was the human. The betting clock on the big screen above the pit showed the over and under line. 4.2 seconds. That was how long they thought I would last before my opponent finished me. Some of them were betting I would go down in under 3. I looked at my hands, small, pink, no claws. They were right about that. What they did not know, what none of them had bothered to check, was what those small pink hands had done for 2 million years on a world they had never studied. What my ancestors had survived. What my species actually was, once you stripped away the research papers and the polite Galactic Council meetings and looked at the real history of Earth. I was not a soldier. I was a scientist. But I had grown up in the high country of Wyoming, and my grandfather had taught me things I had thought were useless until this exact moment. How to read an animal, how to find weakness, how to throw a rock so hard it broke bone. The gate across from me began to rise. The crowd noise doubled, tripled. They were screaming now, stamping their feet, pounding on the railings of the stands. Thousands of voices in dozens of languages, all shouting for the same thing. They wanted to watch me die. A shape moved in the darkness behind the rising gate. Something big. Something with shoulders wider than any doorway I had ever walked through. I could hear it breathing, deep and slow, like a machine warming up. I reached into my sleeve. Earlier in my cell, I had pried a small piece of sharp ceramic tile from the floor near the drain. It was about the size of my palm, with one edge broken into a rough point. It was not a weapon, not really, but it was something. The gate finished rising. The creature stepped out into the light. It was called a Brutaran. I had read about them once, in a textbook on alien biology that I had thought I would never need again. 2,000 pounds of muscle and bone plating, teeth like kitchen knives, claws like garden tools. They came from a low-gravity jungle world where they hunted by ambush, crushing their prey before it even knew they were there. My opponent's name, according to the screen, was Grosh. He had won 14 matches in a row. He had never lost. He looked at me across the pit, and I watched his eyes narrow, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was thinking that this was going to be the easiest fight of his career. He was about to be extremely wrong. The horn sounded. The betting clock started counting up from 0. The crowd roared so loud that the dirt under my bare feet vibrated. And I smiled. Not a kind smile. Not a scared smile. The specific smile that human beings have carried in our faces for 2 million years. The one our ancestors used on the African savanna when they looked at something 3 times their size and decided, quite calmly, that they were going to take it down anyway. Grosh saw the smile. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes that might have been confusion. Then I moved. Not backward, not sideways, forward straight at him, sprinting. The entire arena went silent. It lasted only a fraction of a second, that silence, because what I was doing did not make sense to any creature in the stands. Prey does not charge a predator. It had never happened in the history of the Vorthak fighting pits. Not once. In every match on every world, the smaller creature always tried to run, to dodge, to delay. That was the pattern. That was the rule. I broke the rule in the first second of the fight. And in that fraction of a second, while Grosh's brain tried to process the impossible thing coming at him, while his 2,000-pound body hesitated for just a moment too long, I closed half the distance between us. My grandfather's voice was in my head, clear as the day he had taught me, 30 years ago, standing in the brown grass of a Wyoming hillside with a flat stone in his hand. Every creature on Earth is afraid of us, Holly, every single one, and there is a reason. I was about to remind the galaxy what that reason was. My bare feet dug into the dirt. My breathing was steady. My heart was pounding but controlled. 3 days without food should have left me weak. Instead, it had left me hungry. And hungry humans, historically, were the single most dangerous thing our planet had ever produced. Grosh finally began to react. His right arm came up, the massive claws spreading wide, preparing to swing down in the killing blow that had ended 14 previous opponents. The crowd, finally understanding that something was happening, began to roar again, but the sound was different now. Uncertain. Questioning. I did not slow down. I did not stop. I kept running, and I reached into my sleeve with my right hand, and my fingers closed around the sharp edge of the ceramic tile. And somewhere in the stands, a commentator was saying words I could not hear. And the betting clock read 1.8 seconds, and Grosh's claws started to come down. And I prepared to do the one thing that 2 million years of human evolution had built me to do better than any other creature in the known galaxy. I prepared to throw. But to understand what happened next, and why a small pink creature from a planet no one had ever heard of was about to change everything about how the galaxy saw human beings, you have to understand something first. You have to understand what Earth actually is, and what I actually am. Because the Vorthak did not know, the gamblers did not know. Grosh, standing in the pit with his claws raised and his terrible confidence already starting to crack, did not know. They were about to find out. All of them. And none of them were going to like it. 3 nights before the match, sitting alone in that freezing cell with nothing but a thin blanket and my own thoughts, I had done the math that Veltor had not bothered to do. I had gone through every fact about my species that the Galactic Council had quietly classified and sealed away in files marked for senior members only. Earth is not a normal planet. Most of the intelligent species in the galaxy evolved on what are called garden worlds. Gentle gravity, stable weather, predictable seasons, plenty of food, few predators. These worlds produced peaceful, curious creatures who built cities and studied the stars and eventually met each other in space. Earth is not a garden world. Earth has gravity heavier than the galactic average. Earth has an atmosphere so rich in oxygen that fires can burn nearly anything. Earth has weather that swings between ice ages and tropical heat. Earth has tectonic plates that move and grind and sometimes decide to swallow entire cities whole. Earth has apex predators in every single environment, from the deep oceans to the highest mountains. Earth has diseases that evolved specifically to kill things like us, and we survived anyway. And human beings. We were not the strongest creatures on our world. We were not the fastest. We were not the biggest. We had no natural armor. We had no claws worth mentioning. We had no poison. What we had was persistence. My grandfather had told me the story when I was 7 years old, how our ancestors had hunted on the grasslands of Africa, not by ambushing their prey, not by overwhelming it with force. They had hunted by running, By following their prey for hours, sometimes for entire days, across the hottest ground on the planet, never stopping, never giving up, while the animal they chased grew tired and hot and finally collapsed from exhaustion. Humans are endurance predators. It is written into our bones, our long legs, our shock-absorbing feet, our ability to sweat, which no other large mammal on Earth can do as well as we can, our straight spine, our cooling system. Every part of a human body is designed for one purpose above all others: to keep going when everything else has stopped. And there was one other thing. One gift that my species had, that I was about to use, that no other intelligent species in the galaxy possessed. We throw. The human shoulder is a unique thing. No other creature on my planet, and no other intelligent creature in the known galaxy, has a joint capable of what the human shoulder can do. We can accelerate a projectile to almost 100 miles per hour with nothing but muscle and bone. We can aim it at a target the size of a coin from across a room. We have been killing things bigger than us for 2 million years by picking up rocks and throwing them, very hard, at their soft parts. No alien species had ever seen it done. They did not have the biology for it. They did not know it was possible. I was about to show them. My hand came up, the ceramic tile gripped between my fingers, my shoulder loading with the specific rotation that human children learn before they can even speak properly. Grosh's claws were coming down. The crowd was screaming. The clock read 2.1 seconds. I had one throw, I had one chance, and I knew exactly where I needed to put it. Bruteran anatomy had a weakness, a single soft spot in all that armor. The vascular junction where the second eye socket met the keratin plating. I had read about it in a textbook I had complained about in graduate school, a textbook I had told my advisor was boring and pointless and a waste of my tuition money. I was about to owe that textbook a very large apology. My arm came forward. My body rotated. My hips turned and my shoulder snapped and my wrist released at exactly the right moment. The same moment that every human athlete from every sport in every country on Earth has trained to recognize since we first picked up a ball. The tile flew. It crossed the distance between us in a blur. Grosh did not see it coming. He could not have seen it coming. His eyes were not built to track an object moving that fast along that particular path, because nothing in his evolutionary history had ever needed to. The tile struck the exact point I had aimed for. It struck home. Grosh's claws, which had been coming down toward my skull, froze in midair. His massive body rocked backward. A sound came out of him that I had not heard before, a deep, confused groan, like a machine that had just lost power. The betting clock read 2.8 seconds, and I was already moving for my second attack. Because in a fight like this, you do not stop after the first blow. You do not admire your work. You do not pause to see if it was enough. You keep going. That was something else my grandfather had taught me on a hillside in Wyoming 30 years ago. If you are smaller than what you are fighting, you never stop moving until it is over. I hit Grosh at a full sprint, not with my fists, which would have broken on his hide, not with my legs, which were too short to do any real damage. I hit him with my whole body, shoulder first, directly into the side of his right knee joint. Bruteran knees were built for low-gravity jungle ambushes. They were not built to take a direct hit from a creature evolved for Earth-level gravity, hitting with the full momentum of a running start. The joint buckled. Grosh went down. 2,000 pounds of predator, undefeated in 14 matches, collapsed into the dirt of the pit. He tried to catch himself with his other arms, but his balance was gone, and his vision was wrong, and the ceramic tile was still lodged where I had put it. He landed hard on his side, and the impact sent up a cloud of dust that obscured half the arena. The crowd was silent. 20,000 voices, gone, not a single sound. The commentators had stopped speaking mid-sentence. The betting boards were flashing red as they tried to calculate odds that no one had ever programmed them to calculate. Somewhere in the stands, a single person was clapping. Then they stopped, because they realized they were the only one. I stood over Grosh. My breathing was still steady. My heart rate, trained by years of hiking at high altitude in the Wyoming mountains, was barely elevated. I was not tired. I was not hurt. I was not even particularly winded. The referee, a small creature with 3 eyes and a metal collar, scurried into the pit. He examined Grosh. He looked at me. He looked at the betting clock, which had frozen at 2.8 seconds. His eyes blinked, one at a time, in an order I did not understand. Then he raised a small flag. The match was over. The creature who had been an 847-to-1 underdog had won. And she had done it in less than 3 seconds. The silence held for another full moment. I could hear my own heartbeat. I could hear the dust settling. I could hear, somewhere far above us, the air conditioning system of the arena cycling through its filters. Then the crowd erupted. Not with cheers, not at first, with chaos. Gamblers were screaming at the betting boards. Fights were breaking out in the upper tiers. Someone threw a glass bottle that shattered against the pit wall. The commentators were shouting over each other, trying to explain what had just happened, and failing, because none of them had ever seen anything like it. Veltor appeared at the tunnel entrance. His yellow face had gone a strange pale color. His 4 arms hung loose at his sides. He was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Fear. Not of me exactly. Fear of what I represented. Fear of a species he had dismissed 3 days ago as a joke, and which had just taken down a Brutaran undefeated champion in under 3 seconds using a broken piece of floor tile, and a trick that his biology could not even perform. I walked toward him. Slowly, calmly, the way my grandfather had taught me to walk away from a carcass after a hunt, so that any other predators watching would understand exactly what they were looking at. Veltor did not move. He did not speak. He simply stood there, staring, as I passed him and walked into the tunnel and back toward my cell. Behind me in the pit, the medical team was lifting Grosh onto a floating stretcher. He was alive. I had been careful about that. I was not a killer. I was a scientist, and I had done what I needed to do to survive and no more. But the galaxy was not going to see it that way. The galaxy was going to see the footage, and the galaxy was going to start asking questions. Questions like, what kind of creature can throw a sharpened piece of ceramic fast enough to hit a specific point on a Brutaran's face from 10 feet away? Questions like, what kind of creature can run straight at a 2,000-pound predator and then physically knock it off its feet? Questions like, what else does this small pink species from a planet no one has ever studied know how to do? And somewhere, in the classified sections of the Galactic Council's biology department, a few researchers were going to pull up the sealed files on Earth and read them more carefully than they ever had before. They were going to see the gravity rating. They were going to see the atmosphere composition. They were going to see the predator density. They were going to see the words that someone had typed into a summary section and then marked as restricted. Those words were, "Earth is a death world." I did not know all of this yet, as I walked down that tunnel with Veltor staring after me. I only knew that I had survived. I only knew that I was hungry and tired, and that I needed to sit down somewhere quiet and think. But within the hour, everything was going to change. Because Veltor, standing in the tunnel behind me, was already pulling out his communicator. He was already calling his superiors. He was already using a word that had not been used to describe a human being in galactic commerce before. Valuable. The door to my cell opened and I walked inside and I sat down on the thin cot and I waited to see what would happen next. My hands were no longer shaking. My breathing was steady. The fear that had sat in my chest for 3 days had gone somewhere else, somewhere deeper, where I could use it later if I needed to. I was Holly Parker. I was 29 years old. I was a scientist from a small town in Wyoming. And I was, apparently, the first human being in history to win a Vorthak pit match. I was not going to be the last. I sat in that cell for 2 hours waiting. No one came. No food arrived. No guards opened the door. The silence was so complete that I could hear the distant sounds of the arena being cleaned and prepared for the next match of the evening. Then, without warning, the door slid open. Veltor stood in the doorway. He was not alone. Behind him were three other creatures, each wearing the dark red robes of the Vorthak management. They were tall. They were old. And they were looking at me the way a jeweler looks at a stone that has just been revealed to be far more valuable than anyone had suspected. "Earth creature," Veltor began. His voice was different now. The mockery was gone. "We would like to speak with you about your contract." I did not answer. I simply looked at him. I had learned in the 3 days before the fight that silence was often a better weapon than words. The oldest of the robed creatures stepped forward. He introduced himself as Manager Kresh. He was, he explained, the owner of the arena. He had watched my fight from his private box, and he had some questions for me, and he had some offers. The first offer was for my freedom. The second offer was for a tournament contract. The third offer was a number that was so large, written in galactic credits, that it took me a full minute to understand it. I considered all three. I thought about them carefully. I thought about my research vessel and my crewmates who had been ransomed back, and the fact that Earth was still not a member of the Galactic Council. I thought about the way Veltor had laughed at me 3 days ago. I thought about the betting clock reading 2.8 seconds. And then I gave Manager Kresh my answer. I would take all three offers, but I had my own conditions. I wanted to fight again. I wanted to fight as many times as they could arrange. And I wanted to send a message back to Earth on my own secure channel, telling my home world exactly what was happening here. Because there were 7 billion people on my planet, and most of them had never had a reason to leave, and many of them were much better at this kind of thing than I was. And the Vorthak fighting pits were about to receive a great many new applications from a small blue world that no one had ever heard of. Manager Kresh agreed to my conditions. He shook my hand with 3 of his fingers, a gesture I understood from my xenobiology studies, and he left. Veltor stayed behind. He looked at me for a long moment. "You were hungry," he said quietly. "We did not feed you enough." "No," I said, "you did not." "Will you be hungry for the next match?" I smiled at him, the same smile from the pit, the one his biology had never seen before. The one that made him take a small step backward without meaning to. "Yes," I said, "I think I will be." 6 weeks later, I stood in the same pit, but everything had changed. My name was on the betting boards, no longer at 847 to 1, but at 3 to 1 in my favor. The crowd that filled the stands was twice the size of my first match. The broadcast went out to 47 different worlds. And standing behind me in the tunnel were 11 other human beings. They had come on the first available ship after my message reached Earth. A retired firefighter from Osaka named Hiro Tanaka, a former rugby player from South Africa named Daniel Oyelaren, a mountain climber from Nepal named Pemba Sherpa, a long-distance runner from Kenya named Grace Oceano. Others. A whole team of them, each one hand-picked from thousands of volunteers, each one trained in a different specialty of what human beings happen to be excellent at. We had a name now. Someone on the galactic news networks had invented it after my third match, and it had stuck. They called us the Deathworld team. We called ourselves something else in the quiet moments between fights, when we sat together in the dining hall and ate the much better food that the arena now provided us. We called ourselves what my grandfather had always called our species, with a small proud smile, on that Wyoming hillside 30 years ago. We called ourselves the humans. And the galaxy, which had bet so heavily on us falling fast, was starting to understand something that my grandfather had always known. That the small pink creatures from the blue planet, with the heavy gravity and the hungry atmosphere and the endless storms, were not quite what anyone had thought we were. We were not weak, we had only been waiting. Waiting for someone to bet against us. Waiting for someone to tell us we could not do it. waiting for someone to put us in a pit and laugh. Manager Kresh had a new saying now. He used it whenever a new species arrived at the arena, whenever a new fighter stood in the tunnel and looked out at the crowd for the first time. He would point at the small pink creatures standing nearby, and he would say in his deep old voice the words that had become famous across 47 worlds. Never bet against the humans, especially not when they are hungry. I won my 15th match that night. Hyra won his 7th. Grace broke a speed record that had stood for 200 years. We walked back to our quarters together, laughing, tired, already talking about tomorrow. Behind us, the betting boards were already updating. The odds on the next human match had dropped to even lower. Somewhere, in a classified office deep in the Galactic Council, a senior researcher was finishing a report that would recommend Earth be offered full membership within the year. Somewhere on a hillside in Wyoming, the wind was blowing through the brown grass, and an old man who had taught his granddaughter how to throw a rock was watching the sunset and smiling. And somewhere, on a world I had never seen, a young creature was looking at her own small hands and wondering if she, too, might be something more than anyone had ever guessed. The galaxy was changing. It was changing because a scientist from a small town had walked into a fighting pit and refused to fall. It was changing because my grandfather had been right, all those years ago, when he told me that every animal on Earth was afraid of us for a reason. It was changing because, for the first time in galactic history, someone had bet on a human falling fast. And the human had ended the match instantly instead. The end.